All right. Well, hello, Alex, Ezra, and Bob. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your days to be here to have this conversation. Let's just start by all three of you kind of giving me real quick who you are, what you care for, what matters to you, just real quick. Let's start with Bob.
Hey guys, I'm Bob. I'm going to school for social work right now, so that's kind of what I'm gearing up towards. I've worked in different fields. My last job was working in ecological restoration, actually. I was kind of a farmer, basically. I did a lot of different things. It's kind of hard to explain. But switching gears towards social work, my main interest is kind of exploring the possibility of integrating depth psychology and narrative therapy as a unified means of hopefully catalyzing human optimization and anti-fragility. So what I mean by that is basically I'm interested in exploring the possibility that the combination of those two things can help grow individuals and families who can actually increase in their ability to thrive as a result of stressors, shocks, mistakes, faults, or failures, so that they're not just robust, but they're actually always getting better at feeding on volatility itself.
Wow, very interesting. Awesome start to this. Ezra, do you want to continue?
Yeah. First of all, Bob, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I can say that. Everybody's ears, but
Yeah, that's very cool. I love the feeding on volatility. It's like succeeding not in spite of volatility, but because of the volatility like you experience, right? I love that. Okay, but real quick, my name is Ezra Stormitz. Basically, I'm kind of a comedian, actor, performer, guy. That's kind of my primary goals in life. That's what I study. I'm going to go to Second City and study improv and performing and that kind of thing. But I'm really interested in fighting for things like free speech. Really free speech is the hill I die on more than anything. I think any form of censorship is not something that is good or should be permitted, especially if you're a comedian or someone who's a fan of the arts. Then you should, be fighting for that as hard as you can, even in the most egregious forms it comes in. So really, that's me. It's what I care about.
That's an awesome hill to fight on, I guess. Thank you, Ezra. Glad that you're here as well. Alex, you're some sentences of you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Alex. I am currently a student, a theater and theology student at Grand Canyon University. My primary interest, at least as far as moral duty and politics go, is in addressing class disparity or class-based oppression, things like poverty or helping impoverished people. And it's funny, Bob, that you were saying that you're making the transition over to social work, because I am also making that same transition in a couple of years yet, but I'll be going to school for that soon myself. So yeah, I mean, that's me, I guess.
Awesome.
Right,
Thank you, Alex. Well, the first couple of minutes, I'm already really glad with the three people I found to discuss these topics. Just some words about myself. I'm Stefan. I'm an electrical engineer from Austria, so I'm kind of far away from all of you. But I did study as well in America with Alex and with Ezra, also in theater. So I've kind of, for me, I think what makes me somewhat unique is that I've seen very different perspectives on life, on political issues, etc. Because I come from a more conservative engineering, it's very different from theater, but I've also seen the liberal side as well as the conservative side, and I kind of, for me, that brought me to this talk right here, because for the last 5 minutes I'm now officially a podcast host as well. And that's kind of my life goals, I guess, is to encourage conversations about complex topics, and the stuff we're going to talk about here in a minute is complex. So that's why I was looking for the most educated, I guess, people on, and I wanted to deliberately use young people. Use is probably the wrong word, but I wanted to find young people to get like a millennial opinion on the the things we want to talk about. And yeah, let's get right into it. I gotta say. So for me, what we've discussed or what my goal for this podcast is to mediate between the left and right. And I guess to start things off, I would ask the three of you from an inside perspective, from American standpoint, why do you think is there this big divide between Democrats and Republicans? From an outside perspective, it seems like that both sides of the political spectrum just hate each other. There is no respect. There is no discussion going on. What's your opinion on why that is? Let's start with Alex this time.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, and I think it's almost two reasons. The first is that I think that we have a tendency to paint our political ideals as immutable truths and as philosophical truths. So and I think a good example of this that I use often is when talking about the pro-life, pro-choice discussion, right? That discussion is never able to happen truly because you have people on one side who say, no, you're killing people, and you have people on the other side saying, no, you are controlling and taking control of other people's lives. Both of those are wrong things when you're looking at it from the other side. So there's no way to even approach that conversation because you're not considering where that other person is coming from. And I think the other problem is that both parties are extremely corrupt through and through, and we have the problem of it's very easy to see the problem in the other side's party, but it's definitely a bipartisan issue, corruption in politics.
Okay, thank you very much. Ezra.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the media. Like the media we are watching, the dying television networks sort of having to come up with more and more instigative titles for things that are happening in order to drive more viewership. I think platforms like Facebook and Twitter aren't exactly good for political conversation. So I think that is part of what creates a divide. And I don't know if it's necessarily, I put it at the feet of the people on the platform, or if I put it on the platforms themselves, because they're just free speech platforms, but people tend to use it to oversimplify what the other side thinks. And I think that's a big problem that we have on both sides is it's really easy to make a boogeyman and to make a straw man out of your enemy and tear it down. And I think that's what I tend to see on Facebook and Twitter and these sorts of media platforms, is no one is really getting into the depths or the long form discussions of these complex topics on things like pro-life and pro-choice. I think I might disagree with you to a degree in that I think that conversation can be had between people, even as opposed as that could be. I think there could be some sort of conversation and understanding given if they're allowed to sit, talk, and listen. But it takes a special kind of person with a special kind of patience and ability to step outside of their moral framework to do it.
Do you agree, Alex, that it would be possible? It's just...
Yeah, I think that it's possible because, I mean, clearly we're going to be talking about all sorts of things that we disagree on here. My point was more that when people are doing what you're saying, when you're just looking at your opponent's view in a very simplified sense and you are able to go, that's evil, at that point, discussion isn't able to happen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then I misunderstood your point, and we are in agreement there entirely. Yeah. Yeah.
Gnarly.
Gnarly. So there's a big issue of straw manning the opponents. I think it's two things to me to briefly summarize. It's the oversimplification of the opponents, straw manning, and then tearing apart arguments that the majority of people don't really stand behind, and the cries of the dying media just trying to get attention as they slowly bleed out.
Well said. Bob?
Seems to me that you could kind of say that territoriality and the tendency to defend our territory are so deeply embedded in us that they're almost kind of like the control center for our whole brain. And that, like, our territoriality is expressed in a narrative form. So we tell ourselves stories about our territories as ways of orienting toward the world, basically. And it seems to me like there's a, this isn't really my language, a lot of other people use this language, but there's kind of like a dialectic relationship between order, established order, and what you could call like renewing chaos in any society where, you know, there's some people that are maybe like conservatives are more temperamentally predisposed or inclined towards maintaining the established order, right, whereas people on the left might be more inclined towards exploring the unknown, you know, finding things that can be right, integrated back into the established order to kind of keep it flexible. And so if you think about any sort of established social order in that way, there's all kinds of narratives that sort of describe what's heroic and noble about that established social order. But if the established social order grows too rigid and corrupt, then people, especially on the left, it seems like, will tend to kind of invert into an adversarial stance against the established order because it's so corrupt, and they see it as being, they see nothing good in it, so they just want to tear it down and basically trust that something better will emerge out of chaos. And I feel like that's a lot of what's, I feel like that's related to a lot of what's happening now, where it seems like for various reasons, I almost feel like there might be more happening than just like more being influenced by people outside the US maybe. But there's just so many things happening now where a lot of people are just kind of basically growing very adversarial against so many different aspects of American history and culture.
Yeah, we're all set as well. I think what you hit there at the beginning with the narrative of the left and the right, kind of, I think that's what I would, from an outside perspective, spending quite some time researching this very problem as well. For me, well, I think the most concise form of describing it is a narrative warfare. And I think you've actually introduced this term to me at some point, Bob. This narrative warfare that is happening is just, it's crazy, especially what Ezra said as well on social media. It's driven to the extreme where every side sees only the story that they, well, first of all, that they believe in already, that they want to see, and nothing or nobody that would disagree. Yeah, I think all three of you hit very interesting points there. Also with what you said, Bob, with chaos and order and yeah, the relationship between the two, which is kind of a good segue, I guess, to even start defining what does it even mean to be Democrats or Republicans, or better said, what does it even mean to be liberals and conservatives? Yeah.
I just want to say, yeah, I really liked your summary of Democrats and Republicans, or conservatives and progressives more accurately. The conservatives are obsessed with trying to maintain the order that's still around, and progressives are constantly trying to pull us into the unknown, the future of the society. I'm just curious, Alex, do you think that's a decent summary of conservatives, progressives?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair.
Oh, right on. Cool. I was just curious to see if we were all on the same page there.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is, and I think that most of us or all of us agree on this, that both sides of the story have their validity, because one side of the political spectrum, the liberals or progressives, whatever you want to call it, they're concerned that there's too much. That the system is too old and it needs to be updated. I think that's what we see in our society right now a lot with all the protests and everything. There's a lot of things are obviously going very wrong, and there need to be changes. And the conservative side would be more of well, I'm not sure if the conservatives would admit that there's things going wrong, but they would also say, but there's also parts of society that are still working very fine, and we shouldn't just break those all down. What would you say about it? Maybe Ezra, if you already started with the liberal conservative, is that kind of the core of what differentiates between them? Would you describe that as fair?
Yeah, definitely fair. I definitely think Bob's description was really good. Like I said, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me, it's also very interesting, like what it even means to be a liberal and conservative. And for me, the best way to describe it is with the big 5 personality traits. I think all of you have taken this test by now. Is that true? And it's a big, the big difference to me seems to be within between conscientiousness and openness to experience. So for those listening that don't know what those mean, openness to experience is basically creativity. So especially in theater, etc., we're all mostly very creative people. Conscientiousness is more like the need to fulfill a duty, and those kind of are the differences. Is that what are you guys' opinion? Is that what's happening still today with Democrats and Republicans? Is that still at the core of it, or have we kind of moved away from what the spectrums actually mean, and are still Democrats and Republicans fighting for what they actually should be fighting for in a way?
I think it depends on who you talk to and where you talk to them at, right? Like I have conversations with people who, if you look at their social media, and they're extremists and yell and do say all these horrible things on social media, and then you talk to them about their agendas or their political opinions in person, and you're talking to someone completely different. So I think there's this I don't know.
Formative.
There's a performative element to it, and there's like this. I think the divide isn't as bad as it seems on these platforms, but because those platforms are all we're receiving, especially now with the lockdown, it's our only form of social interaction. Really, is we're just constantly getting more and more. We're seeing the divide more and more because people are a lot more likely to be egregious on platforms where they don't have to see the people they're talking to face to face.
Yeah, I think, Bob, you're quite into the technical aspects as well, and how technology and especially social media is affecting us as a society. What's your take on that?
I mean, sort of the way that social media interacts with like our neurochemical interface, it basically just like puts these immense emotional loads on people without giving them time to process things. Like if you think about like even just say like 60 years ago when people still sent each other letters a lot, that communication had to move through space in a way that even once the person received it, they would probably be just like the medium of that communication kind of encouraged and inspired a person to be more thoughtful and just take time to form a response. Whereas people like receive the news in like virtual space, and they just basically react instantaneously, usually in outrage.
Yeah, usually impulsively, right? It's just like true. It's like there it is, and I can just send my idea out as quickly as I have it. It's not like this dip a quill in ink and then write out each letter of your thoughts, to send to someone. It's yeah. Sorry, just adding to that. Yeah,
it's a bad thing. Obviously, social media is really tools that can be used for good. I just wonder, there's so many things about the internet that I wonder if we need to fail at them before we realize like this is not the way to use the internet. All this mass digital communications technology out and kind of like working it out as we go along. And it just seems like, especially the way that, so the thing with like the way that social media interacts with like our, like grafts itself onto our neurochemistry basically. And the way that it seems to me like massive platforms like Facebook and Instagram, probably others, that's in so many ways that's like linked up with just basically generating like ad revenue and generating like a profile detailing like how to cater to each person's interest basically for the sake of advertising. So there's just so many things that there's a lot more I could say, I guess, but I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think we're all evolving with it regardless. Like I think we are the experimental generation. It's like you are always connected, you are always plugged in, and you don't have a choice. And yeah, you're constantly being judged by all these people on the platforms and things like that. And it's like good, bad, and different. There's wonderful conveniences that come to it, but yeah, there are everything comes with a price, in my opinion.
Yeah, Alex.
I think I'm almost going to disagree a little bit with some of what you said a while ago, Ezra, and tie it into what we're talking about now. I think that what we are seeing with this idea of like impulsive responses to what we take in, and less careful thought in a lot of ways to how we respond. I don't think that is resulting in a disconnect between what people actually think and what we think they think. I don't think that we're just getting a misrepresentation or that this divide is seeming bigger than it is. I think what we're starting to see is we're seeing radicalization.
Well, that's definitely true.
And I think that's it's happening on both sides. And for example, we have forum boards like 4chan, right? 4chan is often used by people on the right or far right, and it becomes this breeding ground for further radicalization until people continue to go further right and further right until we get dangerously right. At the same time, on the left, we have social media, like a lot of my friends are becoming communists, right? And it's like, and I say that a little jokingly, and like, everyone here at GCU, where everyone's super conservative, likes to joke that I'm a communist when that's not accurate. But like a lot of my friends, especially my friends from my previous university, where it is far more left, are the internet is, and their just responses and then being fed equal responses. It's not making a synthetic divide. It is creating a very real, much larger divide as both sides continue to drift further apart.
I would actually agree with that. Yeah, no, what I was saying before, like I will say that there are certain individuals in my personal experience I've talked to who have been a lot more egregious online than they will be face to face. But you're entirely right that it's not. I wasn't trying to imply it was a synthetic divide. It is a real divide. I mean, there are literally people on the streets fighting each other right now. Like it's the divide is as concrete as it gets. So I certainly wasn't trying to make that particular case.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good summary of the whole social media problem, that radicalization is kind of at the core of it all, and it seems like, as you said, on platforms like 4chan, it's also very real, but also on bigger platforms like Facebook. I don't actually know the numbers, but on Facebook, etc., it's also the same. That the more, even though those I would consider more liberal platforms. Yes, Ezra.
Sorry, I have a question for the three of you. So Alex, you were talking a little bit about 4chan and like where you said the right can go too far. I'm curious as to where you think the right can go too far, and I'm curious if we together can figure out where we think the left can go too far, because there can clearly be radicals on both sides, right? I mean, I think we would agree to that. I'm wondering where we could sort of, and I know it's hard to draw these sorts of lines, but where would you sort of draw the lines for radicalizations on the extremes of things.
Yeah, we were going in the same direction there. I think that's one of the big problems that we have today. That on the right, I think we all agree, like as soon as your race is better than somebody else's race, that's kind of okay. Here we have a clear cut.
Yeah,
you don't deserve a seat at the table, I think is the phrase that you often use, Ezra.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of we talked about this beforehand. That's kind of one of the controversial topics that we're going, or that I would like to have discussed here. But I would like all your opinions on that as well. Can the left go too far? Let's just pose that as a simple question. Everybody, does everybody agree that there's also a point on the liberal side of the spectrum where people can go too far? Does everybody agree with that?
Yeah. So, although it's tricky because it's like at that point, at least like thinking through the perspective I was thinking through before, like the people who might be more liberal, who might become like adversarial or against the established order, I mean, they're obviously probably going to be totally behind like their reasons for having turned against it. So in that sense, like the people on the right are maybe going to be the only ones who think the left has gone too far. You know what I mean? Like it's weird. I guess I don't know that anybody knows really how to like sort of demarcate that. Yeah.
I'm not sure I understood that right. Why? I mean, I think people on the very right will also not see themselves as a problem. Like there is such a thing as being too right. Yeah. I think that's kind of, if you're on the very right wing and like you just, I don't want to get into examples, but they definitely don't think that they're too right. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't have that belief. So what do you mean do you think that's more of a problem on the left than on the right, that there's it's hard to find reasons to be too far liberal in a way?
I guess I would just say I do think that the left can go too far based on my own personal conviction.
Okay.
On. I'll say.
Yeah, Ezra?
All right, yeah. I've heard these definitions. They're not from me. Like I've heard these definitions from someone who's done a lot more research and is a lot smarter than me. But they gave me the definitions of, conservatives can go too far whenever they claim racial superiority, that kind of thing, as sort of like genetic cleansing, anything like that. You're like, okay, done. Yeah. And the left can go too far through calls for equality of outcome. And I really like that parameter.
Alex, what's your take on that?
I disagree a little bit, and part of that is and I think okay, let me try to explain as best as I can.
Okay, we officially started the conversation now.
I think that my opinion, and I think that we have to have a larger conversation about equality versus equity, and what that means and what that looks like, because the danger, and this is, and I don't say this to demean any of you, this is very often a right kind of point, is that they are very for equality at the expense perhaps of equity. So equity is looking at the circumstances at the beginning and taking that into account in order to give people a level playing field to then operate on. So it's like somebody who is rich, who is born into a rich family, is going to have a very different chance at life as somebody who is born into a very poor family, right?
It's actually not a great I've heard it's actually not a great predictor of success. Being born into a family, IQ is actually a much larger correlator to success than, for example, being born into wealth.
Sure, but when it comes to their legitimate chances, and for example, actually, I'll make 2 points here. First, IQ is a bit of a nebulous thing and is a little debated on its actual effectiveness for determining intelligence. And the other point is, take a child in a poor household in a poor community, right? His parents don't have time to get him or don't have the money to get him a tutor. His teachers aren't good. He's surrounded by violence. He has to work in order to help his family stay afloat, right? Like, those are all things that are going to detract from that development even of intelligence. And then when it comes time for him to try to get into college, you know, his grades are poor, and he doesn't get scholarships, but then so then he has to take out loans if he wants to go to college. And even though he gets a decent amount of federal loans, that's still a lot of money to be in debt for somebody who's already poor. And that
things into effect that lower standards for certain people coming from situations of poor wealth and things like that. And I'm pro things like school vouchers that allow children to not be stuck in the school districts of their community, that they can reach out and go to whatever school they'd like to go to. Because, you know, I completely agree that you can't necessarily improve someone's inherent IQ, but you can certainly hold it back. Yeah. You know, you can make it worse. We know that. And things like not getting proper nutrition in early stages of development, or not getting you know, the same level of education, like things like that. Like, those are absolutely things we need to address. And I'm with you on finding solutions on things like that, for the record.
Sweet. And that's just like an example of what I mean in like the equality versus equity conversation, because a lot of people on the right and are become very attached to the idea of equality, and even like, I mean, like, my father didn't grow up in a particularly wealthy household in any meaning of the word, right? But he you know, quote unquote, pulled himself up by his bootstraps, you know. And like, so now
it's the story of my family too. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, so like, my dad is like, yeah, you know, like, equality, like, I had an equal chance as anyone else. But that's not always entirely true and entirely fair to say.
There's obviously differences between equality of opportunities as well. But just for those that might not know the difference, Alex, would you agree that basically equality stands for equality of opportunity and equity stands for equality of outcome? Because we at the beginning were saying that this is kind of not a fair statement, or there's some confusion about those two words.
Right. I would say equality, because equity is really at the end of the day about equality of opportunity. Because it's
I love equality of opportunity. I think
right.
Anyone with sense should fight for equality of opportunity.
But equity often gets misconstrued as equality of outcome.
Okay, that was something I was actually thinking as well. So could you explain what equity is then, if it's not equality of outcome? What is equity for you then? For me, and this might be a miscomprehension on my side. For me, the way I understood it, equality is equality of opportunity, whatever that means, but everybody should have the same opportunities. And as Ezra said, I think that's kind of, everybody agrees on that. Everybody should have the same opportunities. Equity is, as far as I understood it so far, and this might be a fault of mine, is when you don't want that everybody has the same opportunities, but everybody should have the same outcome. Is that not a fair description then of those words?
The problem, I guess, with saying equality of outcome is it implies that it is like, I want everyone to end up with the same amount of money by the end of it, right? And that's not true. Equity is about making sure that people have a level starting place. So it's equality so that they can then work however hard and, you know, end up resulting according to their work, not according to their starting place.
Okay,
So it sounds like to me you're saying you're for equality of opportunity and not necessarily for equality of outcome, although equality of outcome sounds nice. Good,
Equality, right.
You're more for equalizing the playing field to make sure that everyone, you know, and we factor in the disadvantages that people have, and then we equalize the opportunities for people to gain the same levels of success.
Absolutely. My point was just that equality of outcome isn't really a thing other than like the most the strongest Marxist Leninists, other than them, like the equality of outcome isn't really a thing anyone's fighting for.
Okay. Oh, I disagree with that. And that's why I say it's too far. Like you said, the extreme Marxist Leninists people fight for equality of outcome. And that's why I say that, to me, is where the left goes too far. When you say you want everyone to end up with the same amount of everything and live the exact same life regardless of their input or output to society, I have a problem with that.
Would you agree with that, Alex? That if somebody actually claims that equality of outcome is absolutely necessary, that goes too far?
Yes, with an asterisk.
Okay, fair enough.
And my only asterisk is there are two flavors of communism, right? Because ultimately equality of outcome is communism. And there's two flavors. There's statism. Statists are also called tankies. And then on the other side, you have anarcho-Marxists, which is much different.
Basically tear everything down and build a perfect world.
Right. Anarcho-Marxists are idealists, but they're not, I would say, they desire equality of outcome, but not through force, but by people equalizing themselves. Like, they believe that if we set people up in an ideal world, the rich will give to the poor.
I certainly know some who are not afraid to use force. I'll say that.
Those might be the other types of Marxists then.
The statists?
Yes. So
how would
statists.
How would you describe those? Because I'm not familiar with the term.
Statists
I'm not either, actually.
Yeah, so statists are, and the reason they're called tankies is because they believe in the use of tanks. They,
now that makes
sense. So like, statists are, they believe that the dictatorship is a necessary step. So they believe in the use of extreme force and a totalitarian dictatorship in order to have a perfectly equal society.
Okay.
And I think that and it's not as prevalent as, like, especially in America, anarcho-Marxism is the primary form of Marxism you encounter. Like, when people were like, Black Lives Matter, like, the leaders are Marxists, right? Sure, but they're anarcho-Marxists, so they're idealists. They're not statists.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say though. I still think there are a lot of people who ascribe to that to the other side of that doctrine that still are willing to commit violence or damage to things, to property. And
I feel so as well, but let me interrupt you there for a second, because Bob hasn't said a word in a long time. I'd just like to hear his opinion on where we've gotten so far with the definition of the line where the left could go too far. What's your take on what Ezra and Alex have very well said so far?
Yeah, I think you guys have made good progress. I guess I would tend to probably agree with Ezra when he said that, you could draw a line saying the left has gone too far when you want everybody to end up with equality of outcome, where everybody ends up with the same thing. Which
seems to be that Alex, for the most part, also agrees with that, actually. With an asterisk, but
yeah,
more or less, yes. Okay. Yeah, Bob?
Yeah. Which, I mean, yeah, that'd be great, but it seems like all the places that have tried their hardest to make that happen ended up terribly.
Yeah, I have to agree with that one.
Like that kind of, for some kind of like ethic to organically emerge across the world where something like that could be possible. And like Alex has kind of mentioned, a lot of that's sort of maybe rooted in like different forms of idealist philosophy in one way or another.
Yeah.
But then I guess the four of us all kind of agree that as soon as somebody, or let's go back to Alex's asterisk just to be kind of very specific. What's your concern that if we draw the line there, what still needs to be added to kind of, or what's your concern with it?
Oh, right. My point was just, and I guess I'll say two things. My concern was, yes, we should definitely draw the line on like statists and like Marxist-Leninism. The idea of the necessitation of a dictatorship is not necessarily the best.
Fair to say.
Not a good course. No, I have. Okay, sorry.
You mentioned, Ezra, that you have seen anarcho-Marxists who have resorted to violence.
Right, people who aren't for dictatorships or that kind of thing. They just they just want a tear down of the system, and they want sort of democratic Marxism, but they still want a tear down of the current system and are willing to do that literally.
Right. I will say that's something that we have to, I guess, think about. Like, not like consider, like maybe we should, burn down the White House. But like, I'm saying we do have to think about the ethics of that, because like, what are the ethics of revolution, right? Like, I mean, our country was founded in revolution. So is it fair to say that violence is always wrong, especially when it's against an oppressive system? My point is that anarcho-Marxists are not doing things out of malintent, right? So even when they are resorting to violence, it is because they are trying to achieve a better system for our society. They are trying to.
I agree. I agree with what you say there. That most of them act from a well-intended place of heart. I would say that they actually want to make things better. One little phrase that stuck out to me there was that you when you mentioned the oppressive system. However, was that you referring to America in today's world as an oppressive system, which makes the violence that we've seen in the last few months kind of
justified?
Justified. Thank you.
I would say that yes, that is what I was referring to, because obviously that's why we're seeing violence, right? Is because people are, and whether or not, like, for example, I was planning on going to the George Floyd protest in Cleveland when all that was going on, and but like I'm not personally of the ethos that violence is the best course of action. I'm not like a looter or burner or like so on and so forth. But like I was
say.
Wait, let him finish, Alex.
All right,
Ezra.
My bad.
No worries. I was planning to go to help with the med teams, was my plan and my intention, because I believe that that's a good way to be of help without actually, because I'm not sure where I stand I'm not sure I'm quite in the place where I believe that we need to tear down our system through force.
Okay.
However, my point is that people who are acting in force right now, we just have to understand, with the exception of like statists trying to set up a dictatorship where somebody rules over and oppresses the working class, essentially. Anarcho-Marxists, if they're using force, are doing it because they have decided that that is their last option in order to make a better world.
Okay, Ezra, you were gonna say something? Too late.
It's no. It sounds nice. Like it's. I don't know. To me, there's too much personal incentive involved. To say that I can go steal things from a Target personally, and I get to, or wherever, local businesses, or tear things down, and I just get to say, well, don't worry about the actual damage I'm causing to the actual people, because I'm fighting for a larger moral cause in my civilization and society. Even though these people were not accountable for the oppression that I'm under, I'm still going to take and punish them. And I think that is I don't think it's a good justification for those sorts of actions. I understand that you're talking about the ethics of revolution, and I do understand that people who go unheard will find a way to get heard, whether it's through destroying things or through violence. And so that's why I'm and I imagine you as well are very pro creating a dialogue. But I think part of that dialogue, to me, shouldn't be justifying the actions of people who tear things out. I don't care if it was in the name of a right-wing idealist society, or if it's in the name of a left-wing idealist society. If you're committing violence, I'm not for you. I'm not for that particular thing you're doing, even if you do claim it's for something morally virtuous. I personally think it's more to satisfy your own desires. And I have a hard time separating that out.
Yeah. Bob, what's your take on using violence as a means to express yourself or to fight for the good?
I think it's very tricky to be fully conscious of what's motivating you. And I think that, we hear a lot of sort of what big focus of the left these days is kind of unconscious bias, unconscious racism. And it's just very tricky to me to try to kind of qualify or quantify people's consciousness on something. Like it's just such a complex and so to me, it seems like I would advise people to try to be as wise as possible in that way and just be cautious and not so maybe in that way I'm more conservative, where I'm like, let's try not to maybe just resort to violence quickly. But at the same time, it's like there's so many, it depends on the issue. Like when you look at an issue like kind of the primal wounding that African American people have experienced in US history due to slavery and other things they've experienced in segregation, things like that have just in a lot of ways have just stewed under the surface for so long and have built up so much resentment and things like that. It's just but I'm cautious about anytime someone thinks that they're being motivated by purely good motives. I tend to be cautious of that, I guess I would say. But at the same time, it's at what point, it seems to me that something that's beneath a lot of what's happening now is that you could say that sort of, the capitalist vision that acts out the fantasy that there's a nature out there somewhere that we can perpetually economically exploit with no repercussions. I think you could say that that's vision is dissociated from participation in reality. And we live in a world where corporations are considered people. And to me, the modern corporation, in a sense, it's the most intense expression of the narcissism of our post-enlightenment rationality that we've come up with yet. It's almost in so many ways, we're learning from corporations how to be human instead of teaching them what it means to be a soul, when we can't teach them, because a lot of, as secular, industrial, materialist, capitalist people, we've kind of lost our own souls to the economic system that we've set up. So it's very complex for me, and it's not, I don't know what you guys think about that, but
I definitely agree with what you said at the beginning, is it's really hard to judge people's motivations. Like you can't, like I don't claim to know anyone's consciousness who's doing what they're doing. But my point is you can't, my point, that is kind of my point, is that the water is murky and you can't tell if they're doing what they're doing for the sake of themselves or for the sake of their public image, for the sake of societal support, for the sake of maybe it's really good intentions and it's really good morality, and it could be for some of them. But the problem with for me is that the water is murky and we don't know exactly, you say you can justify these sorts of actions if it's for a revolution, but what is that revolution leading to is a big question for me.
I think I kind of disagree on one, like it wasn't really a point, but when you say that you question how many people have good intentions, I think consciously most people that Alex is talking about when he's talking about the
I'll say they think they have good intentions.
They think they have, yes, in their consciousness, like what they think or what they know, I think they come from a good place. The problem is that all that is to it. If we can go back. Yeah, Ezra.
Sorry, I keep interrupting. I gotta shut
it's
my
all
mouth.
Good. It's
No. It's. I'm just saying. Yeah. No. Go ahead, Stefan.
No, I just wanted to go back to Alex because when you said that we have to differentiate between the two type of Marxists, the statist was what was the second type again?
Anarchist.
So yeah, statists and Marxist or anarcho-Marxists.
Anarcho-Marxists, yeah. What would you? I think the last thing you said was that if from your perspective, if it's not the statists that want to have a dictatorship, but if it's the anarcho-Marxists that they just want to come to a place of equality of outcome, and you kind of seem to believe that if they use violence, it would be, or it seems okay for you. How would you argue for that?
That's not necessarily what I'm saying.
Okay. Sorry, but I might have misunderstood.
No, you're
but
good.
Please clarify.
So my point is, okay. I will say my initial point was just to say that equality of outcome isn't always when the left goes too far. It was initially just to point out that like some people who believe in equality of outcome are not, wanting a totalitarian state, like they are wanting anarchy because they believe that people will be good, which I think is foolish. But I also think that it is not evil. Now, as far as violence goes, my point was mostly that it's a conversation that needs to be had more because and this is where that distinction I think becomes important, is because like when we're talking about the violence of the protests, right, of these most recent protests, we have people who are acting violently in good conscience and in bad conscience, right? Because like we have people, I mean, I even know people personally that went to those protests, so that they could loot a Target, like, and like, I don't respect that, obviously. But like, and there has to be a certain degree of good faith that we have, right? Because like, obviously we can't know every little minor intention that somebody has, but I mean, when we look at the American Revolution, right? The American Revolution, we looted, destroyed property. We burned down a mansion in Boston. Like these are all things, and we look at the Boston Tea Party, right? The Boston Tea Party, while it was in response to government taxation, right? It's not like the tea company had anything to do with that, like they just make the tea. And we look at the American Revolution as this moral good, right? We look at it and we were like, it was a good thing that we got away from the British government. But now we're so quick to turn around and say that any revolutionary violence now is wrong when it's people fighting back against what they view as an oppressive government. So my point is less that I personally think it's right, because I'm not sure that that's necessarily the argument I'd like to make. I'm not sure that I'm necessarily saying I think that we are in the right place, or that violence is being it's being gone about the correct way even. My point is more that it's too hard to make a blanket violence is wrong. It's too hard to like just be like, hey, when things get violent, that's when you've gone too far. Because I think that these people are revolutionaries at heart, or the people who are acting in good faith, right? The people who are politically motivated are revolutionaries at heart and are acting in violence in order to enact a better world. And whether or not you think that is justified in this moment, and you can even, I can even denounce that, right? Like I could be like, hey, I don't think this is, like, I don't think we're there right now, but I don't think that that's the same as, and I don't think it's fair to equate that to white supremacist violence, right? Because that there is not good intention there.
Well, they think they're fighting for good intention. They think they're fighting to create a better world. I think it's egregious what they fight for. I think it's horrible, but they commit violence for just as good of intention as the Black Lives Matter people in their own mind, anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you can make the distinction that for at least in their own minds, I think both parties think, or I wouldn't call them parties, but both. Yeah. That we just talked about, white supremacists that think the white race is simply better than the black race, or on the other side the Black Lives Matter people that are at the very tip of it, like looting and rioting. I think they're both come from a place, or I think it's hard to say what place they're coming from, but I don't, in their own mind, I'm absolutely sure that they're both are very, very convinced that they're acting from a good place.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, after you.
I think that we are able to analyze from the outside, though, the ethics of something, right? Yeah. Because let's just look at the ethics of what both sides' dream world is, right? Because like on for a white supremacist group, right, the dream world is the subjugation or oppression of people of color, right? And the position of white people in power solely based off of the color of their skin, right? And then we can even extend that further. They would also, I'm sure, want to oppress LGBT groups, right? And then we can extend it further, and so disabled groups.
And I think we already drew that line before. Like we know on the right side there is a line where if you the things you just described, we distance ourselves from those, and that's where you've gone too far. I think that's fair. So now, and to your second point. So how is that on the left side? Because that's kind of the thing we've been talking about now.
Right. Well, my point in describing the right side is to provide a contrast. So then on the left side, there, or at least, and this is why I made the point to differentiate between statism and anarcho-Marxism. Yeah. Anarcho-Marxists, their dream world is a world where everyone is equal, right? And everyone provides for each other and is good to each other.
How do you obtain that equality?
Oh no. I totally agree.
Do you know what I mean? It's like where do we get it? Like they're not, the people who have the positions of wealth aren't going to give over their money. So how are you going to take it?
And I think that's where our concern comes from.
That's why my line is
past where if we've looked at equality of outcome in the past, and even though that might be with good intentions, if everybody's equal, obviously that would be a great world. But the problem is every time that was tried in the past, the violence and it's hard for me to find words, but what happened was nothing better than the Holocaust. And that's that says something. So for me, that's where I say that's why we have to draw a line on the left just as much as we draw a line on the right, where the possibility for suffering and the possibility for a lot of suffering, pain, and violence is on both sides of the spectrum. So I wouldn't necessarily say just because you're for equality and your picture might be better in your head, the outcome might not be much better.
Yeah, my problem with equality of outcome is in order to obtain it, you have to take away the free choice of individuals, because men and women, when left to their own devices, are going to choose things that are not the same. We have different interests. We're different people. And like, if you look among spectrums of just people in general, we choose different things. And in order to achieve a level of equality of outcome, you have to either make everyone be interested in the same things, or say that everything is equally valuable in its contribution to society. And either way, I don't think that's accurate.
I agree with you, and I think that what we're stumbling on is my point is not that I think that anarcho-Marxism is correct.
Okay.
I am not an anarcho-Marxist. I think that it is foolish and idealist. But anarcho-Marxists, what they believe is they believe, and I think that it's if any anarcho-Marxist is listening to this podcast, I'm sure. I'm not trying to be mean to you. I
am. No.
I think it is a childish ideology. I think that it is very, because what they believe ultimately is that they're not going to have to force anyone. That's what anarcho-Marxists believe. They believe that if we remove our structures we have, that people are just going to be like, yeah, I will give half my money to my neighbor.
Sounds good.
Right, like it's this idea of it's this idea that is not realistic. However, I think that it is misguided and foolish, but I don't think that it is evil, right? It's sort of like this childlike belief in people's good nature. They believe that everybody is naturally good.
But
it's a naivete, though, that has cost us hundreds of millions of lives across the 20th century.
Yeah, I think I would say that even though it might not be evil in its intentions, it's just as dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Just because it's wrapped in a guise of empathy, to me, doesn't mean it's any more dangerous or pernicious than the ideas that are more openly and blatantly pernicious. I just think they do a better sleight of hand of throwing it underneath.
Alex, maybe you one more comment, and then I would love to hear Bob again, just for.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Bob.
We don't really have, there is no good model of anarcho-Marxism in the world. It's never been done because it doesn't really work. But it's not anarcho-Marxism. My point is that it's not anarcho-Marxism that is causing that pain. It's statism. Statism is, when we think of communism and all of the pain that it's caused, that was statism. That was not anarcho-Marxism. The best example I possibly have of anarcho-Marxism, I don't know if any of you folks are Christians. I don't think so. Okay, perfect. So when we look at the early church, actually, in the New Testament, the early church is anarcho-Marxist, which is, and it doesn't last. And the only reason they are is because that they believe that the end of the world is coming within the next couple of decades. Yeah. So like, it doesn't, there's no reason to like hold on to your wealth, because it's like, we just donate everything beyond what we need to the communal fund. And then whenever somebody needs something, they get from that communal fund. That's how the early church worked. But like, it's not sustainable long term, right? But it also is not we don't have documented examples of anarcho-Marxism causing pain the way statism has. Your concerns with communism, I think, are with statism and not with anarcho-Marxism, is my point.
I think
our
we're splitting
concern with
hairs.
I think the problem is if you're saying that the one side of the Marxism is causing all the pain, the other side of the Marxism isn't, but they're also, as you say, it's not working without the other side. Like if they want to actually enforce, or not, I know you don't like the word enforce, but if they want to build a world without force that achieves Marxism, I think the problem is there that if you can't do it the right way, then they'll end up doing it the other way, and that's where we end up with in the same spectrum. That's how it's Bob. I would love to hear your take on it.
Okay.
How would you formulate that? My take on what exactly? I was thinking about taking this in a different direction to sort of.
I think I would love your comments first on is it fair to differentiate between good and bad Marxism? I would love to hear your opinion on that, and then let's take it wherever you felt like.
I guess it's like whenever you're talking about good and bad, good and evil, it's like, are you appealing to some absolute trans-historical definition of those things? Or I guess like what is good and evil? You know what I mean? Like that's such a deep.
For me in large societal things, it's just like the alleviation of suffering as much as possible is a better world than to have suffering.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I guess what it comes down to is because the anarchical Marxists are coming from good intentions, is that should they be allowed to do what they feel to do? I guess is kind of, or should we be careful of condemning them of being dangerous or violent because they come from a good intention?
Yeah, man, it's tough. I mean, there's this sense in which we're kind of this planet of unsupervised children. So it's like, at what point do you come down with the authority? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what authority do you appeal to make that judgment is a big part of it. That's tough, man. I guess what I was thinking of was like, we've been talking a lot about what we brought up to begin with, like the conflict going on in the U.S. We've kind of been talking about that from this very U.S.-centered perspective, but like I'm not super into at all into conspiracy theories, but like something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that it seems entirely possible to me that basically World War III already happened and China won by playing a lot of long games and strategizing in ways that are basically all coming together to drive the nail in the West's, especially America's coffin, and we're just watching it play out in slow motion. Like I can say, you guys are
I'll put a tinfoil hat on with you. No, that's an interesting. It's definitely a switch of conversation, but
well, is it though? When we're still talking about Marxism, but I think we talked about this beforehand, Bob, and I think Ezra, we kind of did as well. I'd love to hear Alex's opinion on that. Do you think there could be a way, or do you think that the Chinese government is kind of actively, just active in America with this kind of what we just talked about in driving these kind of things that have been happening?
It's interesting. Sure, I guess it's
I can qualify by that more too if you want me to.
Yeah, maybe point it out a little, like what brings you to this conclusion, or what brings you to this thought even.
Did you have something to say, Alex?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I understand where you're coming from. And even in a very simple sense, we have a company like Tencent with their hands in every major U.S. company, right? And we have Marxist flames being stoked potentially by outside sources, especially, when we look at the protests, we have strong evidence to believe that there were outside actors instigating violence at these protests.
Really? I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, and it's funny because people talk about it on both sides. You know, people on the right are like, Antifa is coming for us.
Yeah.
And people on the left are like, no, it's undercover police. You know.
And I'll say both have a point.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
But neither side is exactly the boogeyman, you know, that they make him out to be.
Right. And I think it's easily just as fair to be like, you know, like, could it be an outside country as well? Bringing, because when we look at the Cold War, you know, we had all sorts of Russian sleeper agents all over our country.
All sorts of fuckery, yeah.
Yeah. So like, so the idea of could China have orchestrated a long-term plan that is going to result in the downfall of America? Yes. It is very possible.
Crazy, man.
I don't know if I personally think they are clever enough. Like the Chinese government is clever enough. Just because like we have seen them fail at many things multiple times.
Well, true.
That you would think that they would at least be able to like take back Taiwan before they tried to take America.
Well, they just took Hong Kong. 7 million free souls just lost their freedom because of China's want of expansion. So there's definitely some malintent, and I wouldn't underestimate China. One of the things they said a long time ago is like, we will eventually win because, you know, Americans think in every 4 years and we think in centuries. And it's a quote from someone who ran China a long time ago. I'm not good with names or dates. You know, I just don't worry, guys. I just have no sources. Okay, so no. Then I like here's what we know. Like a virus came out of China, definitely from a lab. There's been some people a lot smarter than me who have said that this virus might have some synthetic origins, but regardless of that, it definitely came from China, right at the time where we have just put tariffs on China very recently, that we're making deals with China basically that we've never made before, that put that definitely hurt China's economy more than we've been before. So China has reason to have aggression towards the United States, and they're looking like an expansive state right now. I'm pretty sure they've been doing all sorts of things in the China Sea with U.S. Navy vessels and things like that. They've been instigating and pushing, and not to mention we have the whole situation with Iran where we almost went into where Trump bombed a general and they were shooting at U.S. warships and things like that. And both Russia and China said that if we mess with Iran, like they'll have Iran's back. So like there's a lot of things like outside of just like the division we've been talking about in the United States. There's definitely some global conflicts that I think we have some reasonable concern to be wary of, and I don't claim to know what China has done or what involvement they have in this sort of division or this virus, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than we thought it was.
Bob, you said you spent quite some time thinking about this. What do you think about it? Do you think also with the virus, even though that's kind of shifting topics, but that was part of this third world war that you mentioned?
I can get into that, but so think about this to start. If real large-scale kinetic physical warfare were to break out between world powers, it would be so destructive that it wouldn't really be worth it, assuming that the people calling the shots are interested in preserving something to rule over after the conflict, basically. So for those and other reasons, a lot of the conflicts we see in the world today are more information or narrative wars, with the real kinetic warfare being much more limited, concentrated, and focused, where it's taking place in proxy nations that are basically caught in the crossfire. of things going on between other powers. So I'll just try to, if I can have like 2 or 3 minutes, maybe I'll try to sketch some things out quick.
Please go ahead.
For sure. God knows I've taken my time. So
like the social unrest in major urban centers in the US regarding policing and the state of African American communities, that continues to be a factor in the election and near-term trajectory of the US. And it's unclear how that's going to evolve over time. I think it's probably going to get a lot worse. I mean, so I actually live in Wisconsin. You look at stuff that's happening where like 17-year-old kids are driving across state borders to come to violence that's going on. That's a whole separate issue, whether or not someone's justified in doing that. But just like the kind of chaos that is sort of brewing, I think is maybe going to get a lot worse. And in many ways, it seems to me that the unrest is being driven by deconstructionist groups and cultural critiques that basically render Americans antagonistic towards their own country. And like the funding, the inspiration behind these groups isn't clear to me. Definitely, I haven't researched that at all, but it seems naive to me to assume that foreign operators who share the same worldview and goals aren't involved in some way. So that's one thing. And like in the US, the institutions responsible for transmitting like the most noble aspects of our culture from one generation to the next are public universities. In a lot of ways, they've largely been rendered adversarial to the past history of our country and have come to promote what I would say you could successfully argue are naive and juvenile and embittering narratives regarding many aspects of our society. It seems likely to me that foreign operators who share those kind of goals may have been inspired to weaponize deconstructionism by the kind of loud critiques that different people have been levying against Western civilization in academia for the last like 60 years, roughly speaking. COVID-19 continues to grip the US and the Western world. Like Ezra was saying, like this virus has such a broad range of symptoms, which people with much more knowledge than me about virology have said is a clear sign that it's something that was being purposefully manipulated in order to get it to express the widest range of its potential viral impacts so that they can be studied. I mean, whether or not COVID is in fact a weapon that was engineered and released by the Chinese government, it seems like it's basically not even a serious discussion in the media or public consciousness from what I can tell. I mean,
I want to add one point too, is that China has had a large problem with overpopulation and a coldness to their citizens for a very long period of time. And this virus happens to attack not the young, but the elderly. I'm just like, look, it's a bit tinfoil hat for sure. Like I'm willing to admit that, but the fact that it's, like you said, Bob, like the fact that it's not even part of the conversation or larger discussion, I think it's troublesome to me. It's like, we need to talk about this because like there's a lot of things lining up as far as intentions, incentives, and things like that to me. But I'd love for you to continue.
Yeah. So like another thing is to the degree that it was ever in our control to begin with, our society seems to have lost control over the ability to maintain. Seems to have lost the ability to maintain control over its own development due to our digital communications technologies sort of taking on a life of their own. Like the interface that social media has with our neurochemistry seems to have created inherently emotionally dysregulating digital communications platforms that are just burdening people with immense affective, immense emotional loads. And like our ability to engage in collective sense making at the levels of resolution necessary to maintain the cumulative organizational complexity of our society seems to be evaporating, which that seems to me to have less to do with any one person than just to be the organically emergent nature of the technology. But it seems to me that that's a big part of what's going on. And like this is something I think is going to end up being huge. Like the biggest collective ritual outlets that our society has for immense emotional loads are like NFL, MLB, NBA are three big ones. College football is huge. Like many of those leagues and events are suspended for the near future, or they're proceeding in ways where fan participation is severely limited. I think that's going to be a huge factor, and even more so as these things are now in the last like week, even they're becoming more politicized. And if people, especially men, I think, don't have those outlets to channel their energy into, they're going to find surrogates. And a lot of people are going to go through that whole process unconsciously, and that energy could end up being individually, interpersonally, and collectively channeled in any myriad of destructive ways. I mean, the shadowy genocide of the opioid epidemic is still raging through the US, fueled partly by synthetic opiates manufactured in China.
True.
Andrew Yang commented at the DNC a couple weeks ago that it's estimated, I've heard him use this number before, I don't know where exactly he gets it, but it's estimated that 40% of the jobs lost so far during the pandemic in the US will never come back. Like, I'm not sure of the veracity of that statement, but that's just staggering.
I know, like, being in the arts community, like, we're really eating it in the ass right now. Pardon my language.
Well said.
Thank you. I'm very articulate. I'm known for that. No, but it's really, like, I heard, like, I think it's something like 60% of comedy clubs in the UK are shut down and are never going to reopen, something like that. And that's already, you got to take in mind too that these are businesses who have figured out that they're bankrupt. Like, there's businesses yet who think that they're going to come out of this that aren't. Like, there's still a lot more closings to come. Like, it's not going to be good, I don't think.
And I think, Alex, you might have said something about this before. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But, I mean, there's this notion that, so think about the situation with defunding police forces. Do police have real power? Yes. Do they abuse that power sometimes? Yes. If we defund the police, which I realize not everyone's calling for, but this is just to experiment with this. If we defund the police, will someone else fill the power vacuum in those communities? Yes. Are the people who fill those vacuums going to be people who have the best interests of those communities at heart to a greater degree than the police did? I would say probably not. But to even bring up that line of reasoning is called racist by many people. Mm-hmm. And, like, the notion of strategy itself has become racist to many people, where they say it's something white, basically, and they don't even, I feel like, look at it from the point of view of, yeah, maybe this is there's not something overall in terms of what other people are strategizing. And I think you could say that on the right too, where this is what I think maybe you said something about before, Alex, where people on the right just see the calls for social change as nothing but racism being directed against white people, rather than, like, actually looking at it in a complex way and trying to understand how there's a lot more behind it than that. But yeah, I just wonder, I mean, if all that is true and, like, China's responsible to one degree or another, I feel like it's possible they could have had help from the inside, maybe you could say, but I mean, that'd just be I'd say all this to acknowledge just the sheer mastery of the art of war that they've displayed, if that's true. Like, I don't know if you guys have ever studied The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but it's this, I haven't heard of that, but it's this
I have heard of it, but I've never studied it, honestly.
I mean, it's just,
I have it somewhere here, but I don't know where.
I mean, so all warfare, here I'll read a quote, all warfare is based on deception. Hence, when we are able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must appear inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. Wow. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. Hence, it is a subject of inquiry which can on no account be neglected. And I feel like if all this is true, what I've been saying, like,
oh, wow, I'm going to sleep well tonight. Yeah.
Planning for the long term, man. Like, I say it in full, just an acknowledgement of the mastery that's been displayed. If that's true, obviously that's making a lot of leaps, but
I'm gonna I have two questions for Alex. First of all, what do you think, because I don't think you at the beginning said it would technically be possible, but you don't seem very convinced. After Bob laid out his argument, what do you think? Do you see the danger he is talking about? That's question one. From this possibly being orchestrated by the Chinese government. And question two, what Bob was laying out, the argument against defund the police, that is seen as a very racist argument. That kind of brings me back to you talking about white supremacists, etc., and that they're obviously very bad. And I see a danger there that criticizing things like defunding the police, that is also seen as signs of white supremacy, where, yeah, as we just talked about, that might be a little, that might be very dangerous. What's your take on those two questions?
Right. Okay. So I think
easy
I
ones,
do.
Easy ones.
Yeah. I see what you're saying, Bob. And I don't mean in any way to diminish the potential for that to be true. And I think that you acknowledge that, like, you're not even necessarily saying like this is happening. You're just saying it would be an incredibly skilled move if it is happening. And it's not, honestly, I don't think that whether or not it's happening, it's something that we will be able to course correct. And maybe this is a little nihilist, but I think that the path we are on now, I think we're stuck on the path we're on. And I think that we're going to see where this road leads, but I don't think that we're going to be able to divert course, whether or not it's been orchestrated by an outside force.
Interesting.
I think he's right. I'm very pessimistic about that sort of thing as well. I think we're on the course we're on. Like I have my beliefs and ideals, but it's like I don't see it. There's too many. To me, I really think we're in the. If you really want me to get serious about it, I think we're in the collapse of Western society. Like I think we're going to witness it. I think it'll be in our lifetimes. I really believe that. I think there's too many things going wrong economically. The businesses being shut down. The all the things we've been talking about overseas. Like there's radical inflation like on the doorstep in America. Like it's coming. We're not even trying to fight it anymore. The government has just openly acknowledged it. Like inflation is coming. And so, like, there's the political divide and the threats of civil war, and for me, it's too many things going wrong. There's too many dominoes falling right now in order to stop the chain, in order to stop the line. I think we will collapse. I don't know when, but I think we will. I hope not. I like where we're at, to be honest, and like I would like to maintain a lot of this order that men have worked and died to establish, but. Yeah, I think I agree with Alex. I think we're on a train, and I think the brakes are off, and I think we're cruising towards something.
Okay, we'll head on that because that's some really bad news. We'll talk about that. But if Alex, please continue. I want to finish up this argument and then let's talk about the doom of our society.
Make sure to listen to this podcast right before bed. You'll have wonderful dreams.
Okay, Alex, second question regarding the defunding the police argument and people on the left side taking this as white supremacy, basically, or any argument criticizing any of what they stand for.
Yeah, I think, and I think the problem, let me make this clear before I answer this question. I've spent a long time ruminating on the police issue, right? Like, how do we, because a lot of my friends, like I said, I have a lot of friends that have become communists. So a lot of my friends are like, yeah, defund the police, like we don't need police. But then on the flip side, I do understand, and what that means to them is the increase of a lot of people like Bob and I guess, a lot of social workers. Where and that's what people because like in their argument is, in a domestic abuse situation, why would you send a police officer? You would send somebody who's specifically trained to handle that, right?
I would send both.
Well, I mean, and like and it applies, for every sort of specific situation. Like they're like, let's make things way more specialized, instead of just having this like military force or this militia that that responds to all of these things.
Well, and let's increase this militia's ability to take down people non-violently, non-life-threateningly.
Right.
Like let's increase their ability to take it down. I think everyone in the police force should. I know this sounds a little hooey and a little crazy, but I'm a little hooey and a little crazy. But I think everyone in the police force should have like a yellow belt in jujitsu or something like that. Like the fact
That'd be
that
sick.
do you know what I mean? Like some sort of formal training. The fact that they don't spend more of their time in the gym learning to actually like how to throw people down, how to wrestle, how to grapple, so that way they don't have to utilize the tools on their belts nearly as often as they do, because that's when they utilize them, is when they think they're out of resources, is when they don't know what to do. But if they were much more competent with their hands, we wouldn't see the shootings that we see. I think a large part of it is reallocating the funds that we're giving to police, and like stop buying new toys and gadgets and gizmos and put that money into actually training these people to take down whatever, to subdue people in non-lethal ways,
and to de-escalate.
I think there's a large to de-escalate. There's a large incompetency issue here, as well as a too much authority issue. And I love the idea of social workers and people being on the scene to de-escalate and counsel people psychologically. Like, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I think so really what we're seeing when we're having liberals, and let's be clear, this becomes far more of a liberal issue and less of a leftist issue. Like once you are past a liberal, you are kind of back in support of a lot of, we have a lot of statists. But as far as the liberals have a tendency to not ask questions, right? So they're only going to hear, and they're only going to hear exactly what you say, and then apply that to how they see the world, right? So if you say, I don't think we should defund the police, right? Then what they're hearing is you're supporting the police force as it currently is.
Right. And it's like, no, please, I have so much more nuance than that. It's right. I'm not cool with the murders. Like, please, I'm for solutions. It's just maybe not your solution.
Right. So I guess my advice for you guys is when you're engaging with liberals, say all of what you mean. And it's why, like, I'm sure, Stefan, you've seen me on Facebook. When people comment on my posts and stuff, my responses are very long-winded. I make sure to spell out exactly what I mean and how I mean it, because otherwise people are going to just hear only the words you say and not the deeper meaning behind what you're saying. Now,
and this is part of the thing I was talking about earlier about like the where you get the differences between people online and in person, where it's like, if I have this long-winded discussion about my beliefs, I don't tend to have a lot of liberals who even disagree really where I'm coming from, but it's like, if we try to have this same discussion on in your Facebook comment section, it's like, it's probably going to get a lot more heated than like this conversation has been now, right?
Or on Twitter with 240 signs or whatever it is.
Right.
Exactly.
You can't have this reasonable conversation. By the way, that's why we have this conversation here right now, because it is a long-winded conversation. That's why I believe in podcasts for finding solutions for these kinds of topics, instead of Twitter, where you can tweet back and forth for months, but you will never, it's just too little space for information. Keep going, Alex.
And you get no inflection. Oh yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
Right. Oh no, you're totally good, Ezra. And I was just going to say my personal stance on defunding the police. I'm not sure I'm necessarily a defunder, quote unquote. Like there are a lot of people who are like, yes, let's completely abolish any policing force, right?
Right now.
Right. And like their goal is, like I said, to replace it with social workers or like specialized workers. But I think that there are certain times, and I am in support of replacing the police in situations that it makes sense. But I think there are certain times. Oh, I should also say this. Our current police force, I don't have it readily available, but there was an FBI document that was put out. It was declassified a while back, and it was documenting the FBI has been observing a marked influx of white supremacists into the police force. And that's a huge part of the problem we're seeing, right? A huge part of the problem is that white supremacists are drawn to being police officers.
So yeah, a better vetting process would be preferred, right?
Very helpful.
Something, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Bob, you had a very reaction, or you had a reaction that maybe you want to say something to it.
No, I'd just say that's sad. That's distressing.
Okay.
It's just distressing. Yeah, like I said, listen to this right before bed. You're gonna sleep like a.
My solution, and it's one that I find people generally seem to support, so let me know if you don't. I believe in the decentralization of the police force. I believe in more, because we're seeing most of our issues in major cities, right? Like I live just outside of Cleveland. Right. Cleveland's police force is awful. And we see these issues, and it's because, you know, like there can be somebody who's policing this person they don't know because they live an hour away from them, right? Sure. So if we decentralize, if we make our police forces way smaller and way more per community, right? Then all of a sudden, your police officers,
they develop relationships with the community,
right? So then, like, it's not, you remove so much of that impersonal sort of aspect of police work, which has its benefits. It's certain, you know, like sometimes it's helpful, like to be able to stop a robber without being like, Jeff?
Frank? Yeah. But I do understand what you're saying there. But I think the only problem I see with that is it might end up costing more money to decentralize the police than it is currently costing them. So you would not, it would, I don't think it would be a defunding then. They might actually need more funding to achieve more outreach in smaller communities as opposed to decentralization.
Right, which I guess at a certain point, it just becomes the cost you pay for progress. Right. And that sort of links into my philosophy for everything, is I have recently become very decentralizing a lot of things. Like I'm just sort of like, yeah, let's break it down. Let's make it smaller. Because I think that attacking things on a more individual basis is, you know, because then we can have police forces that match their communities. You know, we can have the
smaller local governments, things like that.
Right. And like, and it's even like I, you know, being pretty far on the left, I believe in the use of social programs, right? But like, one of the major problems we have with social programs, and I think that there are two different ways we can address this. One of the problems we have with social programs is they're so blanket impersonal, right? That like, how do we make sure that somebody in California gets what they need while somebody in Ohio gets what they need, right? Like my needs in Ohio are very different. Now I think we can either decentralize our social programs, or we can use something easier and better for our capitalist system, like universal basic income, which is a much larger conversation that we should definitely have at another time.
Yeah, I am interested in that, but another time.
Yeah. But yeah, I was just saying, like, decentralization is a major philosophy for me currently, which is why I apply it to the police force.
Yeah, I like the idea of more locally involved government and smaller communities and things like that. Yeah, I don't like the big the big federal regulated, mandated, rubber stamped sort of policies that just is supposed to fit 350 million citizens or whatever. It's like, it's kind of ridiculous. It's like, we're all so different. It's like same, but different, you know? And so it's like, there needs to be some sort of federal laws or whatever, but we also really need, more importantly, government involvement and citizen involvement in local government at a smaller level.
Bob, do you agree? Do you think that's one thing that could help us, or do you see
like a decentralized emphasis on decentralized? Yeah, and I mean, you look at things like our digital communications technology, like stuff we've kind of been talking about. Those could be such powerful tools as like a decentralized consensus reaching apparatus, basically, if we could use them responsibly. You know what I mean? Like if we could really figure out how to use the internet well, like that's something that's just emerged in the last 30 years in a way that it seems like is basically rendering our previous forms of social organization obsolete, but we just haven't caught up with that yet. And it's like, how can we, there's so much complexity behind that, obviously. And kind of my focus is on like the stuff I mentioned about China before. It's not like all this talk about trying to make America the best place it could be is happening in a vacuum that's removed from other people that have very different ideas of what society and the world should be like, and that are on a different trajectory than us. But yeah, I would say I'm definitely I definitely try to think along those same kind of decentralized lines.
Okay, I think I would like to touch on one last topic, and then let's take the nearing doom of Western society for the next talk that we're having. I feel like that's a more complex topic. One thing that we touched upon was the racial, not racial, but police violence. That's obviously police brutality seems to be a big issue. I think all four of us kind of agree that they need more training, or they need, as you said, maybe a yellow jiu-jitsu belt, whatever. One last conversation I would like to have, and I think that's where we're going to disagree a little bit, is, and I'll just pose it as a question to Alex, in how far do you think that police brutality is a racial problem, or is it just a police per se problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it is statistically reasonable to believe that, and okay, let me clarify. It is reasonable to believe that police brutality has racial bias ingrained in it, right? Like we see violence against people of color at a higher rate. But I think a connected part of that issue is not just that it is racial violence, but it's that violence against people of color, especially by police officers, is punished much less often than violence against white people, right? So it's not that police brutality against white people doesn't happen, but like imagine, if you will, a police officer shot and killed a little white boy in a little white suburb, right? Like, I mean, I know my church, you know, like my church would have freaked out, like all of the members of that congregation. My church is predominantly white, so like but like when it comes to racial issues, when Trayvon Martin was shot, you know, like my church said squat. Like, I mean, my pastor referenced it, and he's gotten better. But like when it comes to the congregation members, and we see that balloon outwards to how police treat their own and how they punish their own for violence.
Okay, so you see that as a problem within police, but you, like, from my opinion, you clearly can't say that for American society right now. Like if a police officer kills a white boy right now, it would be kind of whatever. If they killed a black boy right now, you would have whole America would be on the streets.
Sure. With yes, but only because it's part of a larger movement that is now happening, right? Like when we were viewing these things in isolation, we didn't care.
What do you mean by that? Sorry, I'm not following.
Before we were addressing police brutality as a larger issue, we didn't care, right? Before we were addressing, because right now, the reason everyone got so upset with George Floyd's murder is not because George Floyd was killed, right? Like, sure, but like, we didn't see these mass protests just because George Floyd died. We saw these mass protests because George Floyd was another in a long list, right? And when we go back, like, the further we go back, we're seeing this trend of mass outrage now in society because we're starting to think of it as like in larger picture terms. I guess is my point. My point is that it is a larger picture issue because in isolation, it's unequal.
Okay, I'd actually love to hear Bob's opinion on this because I don't think we've ever specifically talked about this issue.
On that, so the question you asked Alex of kind of
in how far is police brutality based on racial profiling, and then how much is it just a police brutality problem as a whole?
Yeah.
I don't know, a lot of these questions here.
All I'm offering right here is my opinion. I don't really have a professionally informed view of that. It seems to me like Alex was kind of saying, like, it's almost like each one of these events, like just take George Floyd, like that, the specifics of that event almost aren't really focused on even as much as it just being a proxy for all this other sort of historical tension that's built up. You know what I mean? And I think it's hard for me to maybe formulate what I think, because it's like there's so many people that are stirring up and just agitating dissent and conflict on both sides of that. And it's like, how do you kind of get to the root of what's actually true? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't know that do you, Ezra, have some thoughts on that? I don't know that I really have even thought about that enough to have an educated opinion on it, honestly.
Here's what I'll say. I proposed 2 solutions earlier to the police brutality problem. I think better qualifying standards in order to become a police officer, meaning better psychological full checks, that kind of thing, and throughout your policing career, not just when you sign up from the start, because they don't do athletic or physical checks from the start, and that's a problem. I think training police officers and making them more competent in hand-to-hand combat so that way they can de-escalate things without using lethal force is essential. And so those are my 2 solutions. I want to fight incompetency and racial prejudice. And which of those 2 do I think are the larger problem? Is that the question? Well, I think you'd fix and save more lives, honestly, if you fixed the incompetency probably over the racial prejudice. I think a lot more of it is a lot more of the killings is terrible incompetence on behalf of the police officers that they deserve to be held accountable for. But more than it is, I think, malicious intent against racially profiling people.
Yeah. Alex?
I think I agree.
I'm not saying that's not a factor either.
Right.
I'm not saying, I'm not saying that the racially profiling is not a factor in all this, because it is. But I think police incompetence and the amount of protection and overreaching authority that we give them is the problem.
Right, and I think the I think the reason that we're finding our conversation, or the country is finding its conversation rooted in race, is because of the implicit biases that we're then seeing. That is a factor. We're seeing the incompetency hurt people of color way more, right? So like, even though like we would solve the issue by addressing the incompetency, we're seeing it affect, that incompetency is hurting people of color more than it's hurting white people, which I think is a fair way to look at it. Like it's probably the easier fix. I think you're right. I think it probably is the easier fix to solve the incompetency, because if we train and monitor our police better, then we're going to have less of an issue.
Right.
But I think that it is, until we fix it in some way, it is completely reasonable and expected that that conversation is going to center around race, because that's how we are seeing it manifest.
I would like to propose one last argument and hear your opinions on it. It was an African-American professor from Harvard that did a study. I don't remember what year it was. It was a few years back, where he wanted to prove that police are obviously more likely to shoot black people than they are to shoot white people. And what he found out, I don't remember the name. I can send it to you later. And what he found out was that it was obvious that it was actually the other way around. That because of all the protests that have been happening and also already happened in the last few years, the police are in situations where the circumstances are the same. If it's with an African-American or a white person, that they're less likely to shoot in the case of the African-American than they are to shoot in the case of a white American, because they are aware of all the social repercussions that are gonna come afterwards. I don't know if you've ever heard of that study, Alex. It might be something interesting to look into. I don't know if anybody else has or okay. It would be interesting to look at.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously a very complex topic. I don't know if anybody would like to add something to this. Otherwise, I guess we'll close it for today. Anything still burning on your tongues that you want to get out?
So, guys, don't lose hope, because so think about this. I wondered what it might look like for humans to actually enter into a deep relationship with alien life forms. So beyond the possibility of making contact, what might hyper-intelligent extraterrestrial beings want out of a relationship with us on a more cosmic timescale? Or what might they need from us? What might they have no other choice but to pursue, given the structure and dynamics of their own developmental trajectory? So if you think about, could you ever get used to being around a tiger? Do you think you could ever just be calm and relaxed around a tiger? Your fear and predator,
dedicated my life to it.
would just be firing constantly. So imagine if an alien life form, somewhat our size, just revealed themselves to us. How could we ever actually get acclimated to them? You know what I mean? That would just be such a freak out experience, 24/7 for us. So all I'm trying to say is, maybe the aliens released the coronavirus. Maybe they're just doing all this to get us to blow off a bunch of steam before they do it. Get us all just emotionally exhausted. Always hope, guys.
We're just white. So.
You have alien hope. Come on, beam me up, Scotty. Take me away.
Well, I couldn't have asked for better closing words. Guys, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you all so much for taking the time, for having this, as I would call it, a respectful conversation. This has been amazing. And I can't wait for the next one. Let's talk about the doom of Western society and aliens.
Woo!
Yeah,
sounds good. Hey, it's always a pleasure, guys. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah,
all right.
Thanks, guys, for talking.
Thank you, guys. See you next time.
Yeah.